John Kine wrote a piece for ESPN.com where he asked what is a fairly simple question. Have the Commanders done enough on their defensive line to stop the Eagles? Obviously, stopping the run in general was a problem for them last year. One of the stats that's been floating around there, Kime has it in this piece as well. Of the top 10 teams against the run last season, 9 made the postseason. Of the bottom 10, only Washington reached the playoffs. So how bad were the numbers, specifically against Philly? In 3 games versus Washington, Saquon Barkley alone, nevertheless, Jalen Hurts as a running quarterback or any of the other backs, ran for 414 yards, 7 touchdowns, and averaged 5.9 a carry. The Eagles as a team topped 200 rushing yards each of those 3 games. They also struggled specifically against heavier formations. Kime had these numbers in his piece as well at ESPN.com. Washington allowed 5.4 yards per carry when facing 2 or 3 tight end sets. However, in the past 8 games, or the last 8 games of the season, including the 3 postseason contests, the Commanders allowed 7.2 yards per rush versus those formations. And Philly specifically ran the ball 59 times out of 12 or 13 personnel. I guess I should say 2 or 3 tight ends. I guess they could have 2 backs on the field. It could have been 22 or 23. But 2 or 3 tight ends on the field, 6.1 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. It is clearly an enormous problem that Washington had last year. Philly exposed it as much as anybody. And the solution, Anthony, was to add size. They brought in Javon Kinlaw, who every single person you ask that saw Javon Kinlaw this spring, the first thing they will tell you is that's the biggest human being I've ever seen in my life. Literally. We could not tell them the bit. And we could have Kime on, we could have Standig on, we could have Nikki on, we could have Sam on, we could have JP, Mitch, David Harris, on that list. Anybody that's on the beat, Candy, whoever. What do you think of Javon Kinlaw? Dude, that guy's the biggest human being I've seen in my life. He's massive. Massive. Eddie Goldman, who we didn't see this spring, but is in the mix now as a potential nose tackle. He's over 300 pounds, 320 pounds, to be more exact in terms of the weight he's listed at. Obviously, you have Duran back, who's a 300-pounder. Johnny Newton's a little bit undersized. But then on the edge, you have guys like Dietrich Wise, 6'5", 280 as an edge player, which is about as big as John Allen was as a defensive tackle. John said he played about 285, even though he's listed at 295, and that's inside. So I think this is a very smart approach, and this is where if you look at Washington, Anthony, last year, and you're like, oh, they gave up these big plays in the secondary, they didn't have a pass rush, blah, 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 blah. It all starts with their inability to stop the run. If you could just be in better situations, you can set yourself up for success against the pass. If you can't stop the run, your defense is DOA, because now offenses are in complete and total control. Their whole playbook is open. It's too hard to stop that in the NFL. But if you can make a team one-dimensional, even if that one dimension is the pass, now all the other stuff you want to do, all the variants you want to introduce to the game as a team who wants to generate turnovers, that stuff can happen. And I actually do have some hope that they've both schematically looked at some things. There's some good quotes from Joe Witt in this John Kine piece, and personnel-wise have addressed what they need to address to have a significantly better year in this department, and thus a significantly better defense.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this team try to utilize Daron Payne at edge just because we really could not, set an edge. Dante Fowler was often too small on the run that Saquon took 60 yards in the NFC title game. Is just like the first play of the game, he gets washed. So,
and what no, that was not. He did not get washed. He did not do the right thing, and so like sometimes he did the right thing and it wasn't good enough because he got washed because he's too small. But there was a lot of freelancing from that dude who just would be like, I'm going to go over here. And sometimes it worked. Like he would jump inside and make some plays and you're like, damn, go Dante Fowler. Look at you. But on the play, first play of the NFC title game, the 60-yard Saquon touchdown, he tries a spin move. Like his job is to set a hard edge, outside zone, or some kind of, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what it was, outside zone or mid zone that bounced out that direction. But it's a zone run. His job is to set the edge. And Bobby Wagner's going to come into that hole where Saquon's going to cut things up, and he's going to make a tackle for 2 yards. And instead, Dante Fowler spins back, gets mushed right into Bobby Wagner, causes a multi-car pileup, and now all the players that are inside can't get outside. And where's Saquon go? Outside, 60 yards, house call. So, yeah, it's part too small, but it's also the thing that I like about who they brought in is especially Wise. Kinlaw we can talk about in a second, but especially Wise is just going to do his job. And I mean that in a literal sense, not as a, hey, he used to play for Bill Belichick before Bill Belichick became an American punching bag, back when, he was known as a really disciplined football coach. Like, he will just do the thing he's supposed to do, which means that Johnny Newton and Daron Payne and the guys next to him can do what they're supposed to do. It means Bobby Wagner can do what he's supposed to do, which is make tackles. It means Frankie Louvu can go shoot a gap, and he can be the freelancer, which makes him a lot more dangerous as opposed to, hey, Frankie, read, react, play your lane. Like, no, you be the wild card, Frankie Louvu. And getting rid of Fowler while you're also getting rid of a ton of sack production will make this run defense better, and then you hope to make up the sack production by having better situations because you're better on first and second down, and you can do some fun blitz stuff on third down because it's 3rd and 9, and you don't have to worry about stopping the run on a 3rd and 3.
Yeah, and I think the additional point that you just made in terms of, bringing in guys that are going to be willing to be coached, are coming from a good culture, in a Dietrich Wise. Then you also got Jonathan Jones in the back end. But I think having those people that, are just going to be willing to do their job, I think is essential. But back to the point was, we didn't necessarily have to, we don't now with the people that we brought on, we don't have to move a Daron Payne to the edge. We have guys that are versatile enough to, play the 3 tech, or they can put them out to the 5 tech, and you put them out 7, 9, like whatever. Like, we have that much versatility on the defensive line as opposed to, mixing and matching and seeing what we can do in order to combat the run. I mean, obviously, like, we're going to need to be able to do that if we want to win games.
The thing is, though, they can still do that stuff. Like, yes, you could just say, like, Dietrich Wise is on one side and Dorrance Armstrong's on the other, and pick 2 of the 3 defensive tackles between Newton, Kinlaw, and Payne in the middle, or you're rotating in Sheldon Day and, Eddie Goldman and, like, that, the backups. But if you want to, let's say you're going against a team that really loves to run it and they have certain stuff where they need to get to the edge. If you want to put Daron Payne on the edge, you still can, because you now have Kinlaw inside as a you're not stretching yourself as thin, right? You have Kinlaw who you can put out there on that edge and be like, he is big, strong, and physical. And sometimes he doesn't always read things correctly, but if we tell him, hey man, go out there and don't let them push you around. Don't try to penetrate. Just you wait, let them come to you, and don't move. Javon Kinlaw can do that. So it's about coaching up the talent that you have. It's about utilizing it in the best way possible from personnel and scheme standpoint. But then the other thing that I thought was interesting in Keim's piece is he talked about some of the 3 linebacker stuff that they wanted to do last year and couldn't get to because Jordan McGee got hurt in training camp. And so whether it's McGee, whether it's someone like a Dominique Hampton, that's, last year they still played a bunch of nickel against the 12 and 13 personnel stuff. And that was a problem because now you're outmatched from a man-to-man standpoint. Like, man on man, they have bigger men than you do, and you're all of a sudden getting a tight end blocking Noah Igbenogany in the nickel, and, like, that's not going to work for Noah. Well, now that guy becomes Dominique Hampton, who's a linebacker, and that's a much better matchup. But you're hoping to not lose it if they decide to pass it, because Hampton's a former safety. Hopefully he can play a little bit better in coverage. This is the hope for a guy like Kane Medrano as well. The 6th-round rookie out of UCLA, or what was he, 5th, 6th, whatever he was, rookie out of UCLA. You have these guys that are linebackers but can cover space, and you get a best-of-both-worlds scenario. So you could either go a true base defense with 3 real linebackers in Frankie, Bobby, and Jordan McGee, or you could go kind of a bigger nickel with a guy like Hampton, playing that role. It's, small linebacker, big nickel hybrid. Or you can go true nickel with Mikey. You can go 3 safeties, put Will Harris down there. So they just have a lot more options this year. And I think most of those options we look at as better against the run than the options they had last year, which didn't work out so great when they didn't have the options at all. And they were in nickel all the time. you had a question, follow up on the Commanders D-line conversation.
Yeah, I was curious to pick your brain about whether or not you think the Commanders will deploy a single front, sort of kind of like Ron Rivera did when we had our 4 first-round draft picks. But I think also just having the guys that we brought in, the fact that Eddie can play nose but also move over if need be. Then you guys playing 3 techs, and then you have some people on the edge. Could we see, them, I guess, use the single package since we have all this versatility up front?
Yes, I definitely think that you can. I think that, where that gets interesting, well, a lot of thoughts. First of all, they played odd fronts last year. So odd front is exactly what you think. There's an odd number of people on the line of scrimmage. And whether that is 3 or 5, it could be 7 or 9 or 11. But really, it's 3 or 5 typically. And it's how many guys you have on the line of scrimmage versus even fronts, which are typically 4, right? So last year they played more 3 down, or occasionally they'd play 4 down and 1 extra guy hanging. So, that's kind of a 4-3 odd front, right? So it's still 4 linebackers, 4 defensive ends and 3 linebackers, but you have 1 linebacker that's on the line of scrimmage. And actually they would play it more as like a 5-1. Again, it's getting a little technical, but they would have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. It's just what body types. And that was the thing about the Cinco package when they had it here was they would have 3 defensive linemen or 3 defensive tackles in Duran, John, and someone else. And then they would have the 2 edge guys in Sweat and Payne Sweat and Young, and you truly have 5 defensive linemen on the field with 1 linebacker behind it. I am curious to see if they do any of that this year. And then do they have just Bobby Wagner on the field? Do they have 5-2 and then kind of a base look like you're doing it to stop the run? So like, let's get those linebackers out there. And if we only have, 4 defensive backs on the field, then so be it. That's fine. Who are those defensive backs? Is it Will Harris and Quan Martin at safety, or do you have a bigger body back there? Is it Percy Butler back there with his speed and his ability to get downhill? So there's a lot of, I think, variations off of that. And it could very well be that we want a package where we can get Javon, Johnny, and Duran, the 3 defensive tackles, on the field together. Obviously, you can make one of those guys Eddie Goldman. You could have, if you wanted to get super big, you could put Kinlaw or Payne on the edge with Goldman as a nose tackle, and those other 2 guys is 5 techniques or however you want to line it up, and Dorrance Armstrong on the other side. There's a bunch of combinations. And I think that's kind of the point is, will you see odd fronts? Yes. Is the Cinco or a version of a Cinco package with 5 defensive linemen out there a possibility? Absolutely. Will you see odd fronts with just 3 defensive linemen out there and then Frankie and Jordan McGee on the edge, or maybe Dorrance as a stand-up outside linebacker? Because that was the other thing. Last year they had Fowler, and they'd put Fowler and Frankie on the edge, and Fowler would be standing up. So technically that's a 3-down front, but you're in 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. So Jacob Martin is another wild card guy. He's a guy they acquired this offseason. So there's a lot of different possibilities, and it just kind of is what works best against the team that you're playing. And that's ultimately what you're trying to solve if you're Joe Witt, is you want to be prepared to do all these things. This is actually what made the Belichick defenses so good over the years, is Bill said, okay, you are a team that likes to do this. This is the defense that is best on paper to go against that. We're going to make sure that we execute it on the field as well as it's drawn up on paper, no matter what it is. And so if you can have your guys ready to go in multiple fronts and understand if we're in this front against this offensive line look, these are our run responsibilities. And if this tight end comes in motion and now our gaps have shifted and these are our new, playing the run sounds simple. Play your gap. It's not that simple. You have to know what your gap is. And it takes smart football players to do that. But if you can have that much on the guys' plates, then I think from a personnel standpoint, that was a very long answer to say, yes, Anthony, I think they will potentially have 5 defensive linemen on the field at points this season. I mean,
it's interesting you bring up, I guess gap integrity, just because we've seen Saquon, cut back and, be gone. And that's sort of kind of the thing that would scare me about the single package. I feel as though, like, once you get past that first line of defense, it's not too much really behind
That's where it depends, right? It depends. You can, like, if you're playing nickel and there's just a bunch of little dudes back there, like, that's not going to be great. If you're playing, like, yeah, we got 5, but we still got 2 linebackers on the field. And, we've got a Quan Martin level safety who's a good tackler who takes good angles, or Will Harris, who's same thing. He'll thump you in the run game. Like, yeah, you have an extra guy. But I think what you're also counting on at that point is squeezing down those gaps so that there's not anywhere to go. You can't get out of your gap in the first place, and there's no cutback to have. There's nowhere to go. And I think that's the other big difference, right? Is like any of these things theoretically work if you execute them well. Football is a game of execution. Best laid plans, they can get thrown out with bad execution, and you can have a horrible plan, like, oh God, it's 2-man and they're running this concept and it's designed to beat 2-man. But if your guys match the concept right and figure it out on the fly, you can overcome a bad play call. It's just how it is. That's football. Is ultimately who can make the play, who can make the adjustments on the fly to do it. And whether it's a discipline thing, whether it's a go make a play thing, like, got to have good players. And I think that's, where I land is like, I think the Commanders have pretty good players, and that's helpful. And they're smart players. So that's helpful in getting the job done.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.